Hi, everyone. Before I get to the episode, I want to take a moment to address the United States Supreme Court decision to overturn Roe v. Wade on June 24th, which stripped away the right to have a safe and legal abortion. Restricting access to comprehensive reproductive care, including abortion, threatens the health and independence of all people, which we have already seen with abortion bans and restrictions in countries like Poland and Malta. This decision has dire consequences and could have harsh repercussions for other landmark decisions within the United States. I encourage our audience, American and otherwise, to learn more about what you can do to help at podvoices.help. I encourage you to speak up, take care, and spread the word.
Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your host, Maricella Herrera.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Ellevate podcast. It's your host, Maricella Herrera, and I'm joined by my co-host today, Allison Matejczyk.
Hi, Maricella. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. How are things going?
It's a summer. Things are going well. I'm, embracing the longer days and trying to get out more a little bit.
Enjoying your pool?
Enjoying the pool, enjoying the beach. I'm very lucky to live close to the coast. I know New Jersey gets a bad rap, but it's quite beautiful down here, especially in the summer.
Yeah, I just got back from London, from a long stint over there visiting my brother and his family, and wow, New York is hot.
Yeah. Oh, London's one of my favorite cities. You're so lucky.
I love London. I keep hearing from people making bets that I'm going to move there at some point.
Oh, that would be amazing.
Because, you know, I do like going over there, seeing my nephew, who is 8 months old and the cutest. He's joined us for the podcast a couple of times, mostly falling asleep, as Kristy and I recorded.
What a precious peanut. I can't believe he's 8 months already.
I know, it's crazy. I feel like the next time I see him, he's going to be going off to college.
Speaking of college, two of my nephews are going off to college, which is just like wild to me. It's just wild.
Oh my God.
Yeah. I know.
Imagine when Julie and Luke are Allison's kids. And imagine when they go off to college.
Oh my gosh. They are 7 going on, I would say normally 17, but no, Julia's going on 27. And Luke is very much a 3-year-old boy, and I'll just leave it at that. But my Julia is pretty much the third parent around here.
I could see that. Since she was little baby, she was pretty strong-willed. Yeah. Strong women. Here's to raising strong women.
Yeah, she misses going to the office. She keeps asking when we're going to go to New York City into the office.
I miss going to the office. I'm with Julia on that one.
I know. We'll have to plan something soon.
Yeah, I really think it makes a difference when you can meet in person with your team and see each other face to face. And, you know, it's part of building culture.
It is.
Not that I'm not thankful for the flexibility of remote work. If it wasn't for that, I wouldn't have had the chance to be in London for the 6 weeks I was. So I think it's all a balance.
It is. And it's never an equal balance, right? And I think that's more and more people are realizing that. But yeah, no, I'm so incredibly grateful for the flexibility here at Ellevate, where, you know, I can join a Girl Scout meeting at 4:00 if needed, or be there for homework, you know, during school. So it's great. Thank you.
I love that. And flexibility. I've been I was listening to podcast, Adam Grant's podcast, and on redefining flexibility, and how we tend to talk about companies and their flexibility policies. And usually people just think about time or working from home. But there are so many other things that make up flexibility in workplace. It could be flexibility on what you're working on or who you're working with, or certainly, yes, remote work or the hours that you work at. And I think we do a good job at Ellevate of trying to incorporate flexibility in all the different aspects, as long as people bring it up, which I think is the most important part, which is having that culture that where people can openly say, "Hey, this would be a nice thing to do."
Yeah, absolutely. I got to check this podcast out. I'm excited.
It's really good. Adam Grant's podcast is fantastic. I mean, he's fantastic. I'm a huge fan. I mean, between Adam Grant and Brene Brown, I just, could spend the whole day.
Yes. I think our audience and community would love to know what you're reading and listening to. So I think you should write an article about it.
Oh, I'm always reading and listening to nerdy stuff.
It's great. It's great. I'm getting so many ideas.
I am a nerd at heart.
No, this is not nerdy stuff.
But I enjoy it. I mean, I'm super passionate about building cultures within businesses, and that to me is it's super important. Like if we think about power, and today's guest that's going to be talking with Kristy wrote a book on power. When you think about power, we forget that we all have it in some way, in some capacity. And within businesses, we have it as part of our teams, as part of a group of people who work together for a common goal. And if we can build businesses that let people feel that power, let people speak up about that about their ideas, feel empowered, although I hate that word because it's giving power
out of my mouth. Yeah.
But for people to really recognize that, if we can build cultures where people can stand up and say, like, hey, this is not how things should be, this is what I want, this is the type of work where I think I would thrive in. Managers, particularly team leaders, they have the power to build those cultures. And I'm super, super passionate on how we can really create that world of work where we want to work at, like those companies that we want to work at. We can build them. And that's how we can start making change, not just in business, but in other aspects of the world.
One place to start is through Ellevate and the work that we do with our corporate partners. We have a great program called Corporate Squads that can help our partners and others build inclusive cultures, build a culture of collaboration, openness, communication, break down silos.
Yeah, corporate squads are interesting. We've talked, I think our audience has certainly listened to Kristy and me talk about squads before, which is, our 12-week program. You're matched in a group of other women in your same career stage, and you get to meet for 30 minutes a week for a period of 12 weeks and really dive deep into your goals, your challenges, get advice and different perspectives. But I don't think we've ever told them about corporate squads. Maybe you can share a little bit more about how that works.
Sure. So the framework is very similar to our regular squads program, where it's 12 weeks. There are cohorts of 8 or 9 individuals. The biggest difference is that it's customized and unique to one specific company and organization. So it's only within employees within, one company. But what we're seeing is that the program is bringing together individuals that have never worked together before across different business units, across even geographies. And they're building their network. They're learning from one another. They're building influence within the company and a group of peers that they can lean on all the time to help them move ahead. And we're seeing promotions, we're seeing raises, we're seeing internal changes, from one business unit to another. So career growth. And, some of our partners have said it's been really illuminating. And we launched this in 2020, it almost feels like my third child because we've built this and launched it, and a handful of organizations are working with us on it, and it's really great to see how the companies are changing and the employees are progressing too.
I love it. I think the work that we are doing of providing these spaces for people both internally in their companies through corporate squads, but externally through Ellevate just as a whole makes a big difference. Again, don't feel like you need the power, you need to be given the power. I think the having these spaces where you can discuss and talk makes it clear that you have it, that you, like you said, break down silos, and that you get all this advice and all this great information.
Changing the world.
One professional at a time. So we're going to go to Kristy's interview today. She is, has left Ellevate. We miss her tons, but we get to hear her in some of these interviews that were pre-recorded, and it's great. I also get to text her pretty much every day, so don't worry, we're still in touch. Today's guest is Tiziana Casciaro. She is a professor of organizational behavior at the University of Toronto. And like I said, she wrote a book on power with her co-author, Julie Batilana. The book is named Power for All, How It Works and Why It's Everyone's Business. So let's go to Kristy's interview with Tiziana.
Tiziana, hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me, Kristy.
Let's get started learning a bit more about you. Would you mind sharing with our audience your story and how you got to where you are today?
Oh, okay. I'll try to make it short. So I was born in Switzerland, actually, even though I have nothing to do with Switzerland. It was one of those random places of birth. And I grew up in Italy on Lake Como before George Clooney decided to buy himself a villa there. So I think he waited for me to leave before showing up himself, which I thought was a little bit rude of him. And I went to school. I did my entire education in Italy up until my bachelor's degree, and then kind of migrated to Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania for a PhD in organizational science and sociology at Carnegie Mellon University. And that was an interesting transition going from Milan to Pittsburgh, very different environments, and a place where I could really pursue a very multidisciplinary view of understanding human behavior, which has been my passion for a really long time. But I started out actually thinking that I would be a woman in business. I went to Bocconi University in Milan, which is a business and economics school, thinking that I would, join the ranks of the McKinseys of the world. And it was only while I was well into my program in management that I started to be tantalized by the prospect of doing research in these topics. And I was not at first at all attracted to studying women in particular. And to this day, that is not my primary focus, but unavoidably very interesting questions come up with regards to how women differ from men and others in how they pursue their interests and their aspirations. And so I ended up taking a look at those realities that women have to contend with or embrace, depending, as they go about their business.
It's very fascinating. And were you inspired by your own experiences or just by what you were seeing through the work and the research that you were doing?
It's interesting you should ask, because you would think that my lived experience has had lots of impact on my interests. It might have indirectly. I study of, among the other things, power and who has it and who doesn't. I study networks, the professional networks that people create to pursue their objectives and help themselves and their organization succeed. And you could, in fact, link that interest to something that I've observed. I come from a country where women do many, many things and have massive impact, but it is not the most gender equal country in the world. If you look at actually the gender equity index around the world, you find places like the Scandinavian countries that kind of reliably occupy the top tiers of those kinds of rankings. Then you find countries like Canada and the US around the 20, 25, 26 spot. And you have to descend down to spot 70 or 80 to find Italy. So you would think that my having grown up in a country like that would have triggered me to be interested in those topics, in kind of disparities or gender politics, and it did not. It didn't. What really triggered it was women coming to me for insight into what they were encountering, and that triggered a keen interest in understanding what the research was helping us understand about the different realities, especially in professional environments for men and women. And then I ended up linking those ideas to my own primary interests, which were networks and power.
I want to dig more into the geographic data you just shared, because I think that's very fascinating. I mean, also being someone who lives in the United States, a little bit disheartening. Wish we were higher up in those ranks. But, what do you think, where does that divide come from? To the Scandinavian countries, to US, Canada, to Italy. Is that religion? Is it history? Is it culture? I mean, what are those factors, business and industry? I mean, so many of them drive, obviously, gender equity, and then also, power and control. And what are some of those factors that you really see as, creating more power and power distribution or more divide?
So it's a really massive question to answer because it calls into question very deep historical roots of the cultures of different countries and different environments. And those cultural roots often are steeped in economic issues, in pure geography and the resources that end up being particularly abundant in one environment and less abundant in others. So it's very difficult to really provide a comprehensive account of such things. What remains, though, relatively clear is that Scandinavian countries went through a very deep transformation of their educational system and their system of governance that started really in earnest in the early to mid 1800s. And it was really intended to enlighten everybody in their population and to kind of transform it from a kind of more of a feudal society, pretty. I use the word with caution, but primitive in the sense that it had a system of conducting itself that was not particularly modern. But they decided to really revolutionize the idea of education and embraced a model that they called Folkbildung. And Bildung is a educational philosophy that comes out of the Enlightenment, and they had roots in Germany and beyond in other parts of Europe. And they adopted it with gusto, with the idea that they had to educate literally everybody and not just give them a traditional education in skills and knowledge of the disciplines, but to educate them as moral beings. And so they went to the farms, they went to the factories in the cities, they went to the sharecroppers, they went to all the people that had been absolutely excluded from this higher level, deep, kind of broad humanistic education, and started to bring them up to speed with the notion that we are all very interdependent. In a social system, you cannot just think of yourself as an individual alone. that can just fend for themselves, for their family, and that's about it. There is a community that links us together. There are countries that link us together. There's a whole world, the environment, Mother Nature links us together. And this it's like a philosophical approach to understanding that if you don't understand that you are intertwined with everybody else in your social context, you're never going to be able to fully engage with your reality. You're not going to be able to shape it. You're not going to be able to collectively with other people create the society you want, the society in which you really would like to live. So when you embrace a philosophy of that kind, gender equality becomes part and parcel with the philosophy, because everybody is intertwined with you, men, women, anybody else that is non-binary. You have an open-mindedness to the idea that it's together that we do our best. It's not in each one of us pursuing individualistic purposes. And I attribute a lot of the success in gender equality in those countries to that kind of approach that I find extremely inspiring, because it's something that they decided to do single-handedly in the mid-1800s. And in the space of less than 100 years, they had really changed the values of their society, the level of participation of women in economics, in politics, in all kinds of endeavors. So it doesn't take all that long. It takes, a few generations, not even that many, to really create a massive transformation of how we think about the relationship between the genders as well as other groups. So they don't do nearly as well with racial diversity. That has been much more of a challenge, because it was for the longest time a very homogeneous society from that point of view. And with the insertion of uh, migrants and immigrants from all kinds of different countries, that has been kind of put to the test in many ways. But I think that the disparities you see across all these countries, our own, the ones in which you and I live, those Scandinavian countries, and countries in the Southern Europe or in the Middle East or in Africa, they all are the result of many, many forces. And one of them that is more within our control is education. And we don't necessarily make the right investments to make sure that kids grow up with this sense that you cannot be dominant over a social group and hope that they will be able to contribute their best. That is not what happens. When you dominate over a social group, they will be very curtailed, very constrained in what they're able to do, how they're able to contribute to the society. And unfortunately, we see that in many of our environments, where some of the choices we make collectively in terms of legislation, in terms of access to resources, really change how well women can do. And that's something that we need to be very conscious of.
Yeah, I think about this a lot. I mean, more so, I think through the lens of business. We're a B Corp, and B Corps, you sign the Declaration of Interdependence. It's about how multiple stakeholders, how businesses can be forced for good, for profit and innovating and making money, but also looking out for their employees, diversity and equity, inclusion, their communities, their environment, and how it all comes together. And it's all important to work in that type of harmony and support and mutual benefit. And, to your point, it's business, it's politics and policy, it's education. I mean, it goes across so many spectrums of our lives, to really embrace that thinking and to create a society where we really are investing in all people.
That's exactly right. And it reflects a transition from a view of power as a zero-sum game to a view of power as a win-win proposition. And unfortunately, too many of us in many environments are still captive of this idea that if I gain more power, you automatically lose power. And that is not how power works in many circumstances. And most of the time, when we allow ourselves to be mutually dependent and sort of work together towards something where you need me and I need you. And it's in our partnership, it's in our being able to understand the interdependence between all these pieces that the best outcomes tend to arise, at least in the long run. But if you think that power is a win-lose proposition, you're going to hold on to whatever advantage you have for all the reasons that we mentioned earlier. It could be historical, it could be geographical, it could be cultural, that give you a certain position of dominance. And you're not going to be able to see that by putting the disadvantaged groups down and holding them down, you're not really accomplishing much. In the long run, you're better off if you collaborate. And as a big corporation would do by design, if you pull together all these trends that are not independent of one another. And sure, in the short term, you can take advantage of the fact that you can just squeeze profit out of a certain pocket of the business. But in the long run, we see the consequences. And you just, all you have to do is observe the climate crisis. And you realize that all the business enterprises that have taken advantage of certain resources have, collectively, with our help as consumers, of course, have collectively used up the overall resources available in the environment, and that is not good for anybody, right? In the long run. But it's difficult for people to stay really focused on the long term. Human beings, unfortunately, are much better at staying focused on the short term, and that's evolutionarily, you understand it. The short term is right here and right now. If I'm facing some distress, some crisis, I just want to act on it in the moment and not think about years or decades or centuries down the line. But unfortunately, the best way to ensure greater inclusion of all the groups that can contribute to our collective life together on this planet is really a long-term orientation. So that should be our ambition.
How do you define power?
Power is quite simply the ability to influence the behavior of others. And that is not necessarily a self-explanatory definition, because it tells you what power is, but not where it comes from. And that ability to influence the behavior of others comes from having control over their access to something they want or need. If you need me to get access to a resource that is important to you, and you cannot get it easily elsewhere, in the sense that I cannot control your access to it, you will depend on me. And your dependence creates my power. So that where power comes from. And even within the definition itself, you see that it's always situated in a relationship. So I may have something you want, and you may need me to get it, but you may also have something I want, and I may also be dependent on you to access it. So see, it can go both ways, and you can never truly understand power unless you have seen both sides of a relationship. And that's one of the issues that we have encountered in terms of how many misconceptions people have about power. One of them is power is an individual possession, that I got something that you desire, and therefore I have power over you. And we forget that it's always relative to what you have over me, and it's always situated in a relationship.
And when we talk about power in women, what are some of the ways in which power or lack thereof shows up in our everyday lives? And how does your research go deeper in beyond gender into more intersectional identities and the power divide, particularly for women of color?
Right. Well, the distribution of power in a social context is the outcome of many things. But in most societies, it has tended to produce a hierarchy of power that sees men at the top and women further down. And I'll get to the intersectionality in a second. When you have a distribution that puts some people at the top and some people at the bottom, one thing that we observe human beings doing to kind of preserve their position at the top is a construction of narratives to justify the fact that for lots of circumstances that were not even within their control, they ended up in a position that was favorable to them. So you construct stories that give some legitimacy to the fact that you are at the top and the rest are at the bottom. I'll give an example just to give a sense of how incredible some of those narratives can be. Some of these stories are well known to everybody. So monarchies through the centuries have used the idea of God-given power to justify the fact that there were some members of the aristocracy that were ruling others. And of course, God has nothing to do with you becoming king or queen, but the narrative creates this illusion. And now, we may think that believing such stories is naive, but in reality, they have great appeal, and they had great appeal for many centuries. When it comes to women, we have seen a succession of these narratives. One of the most, I don't know how to define it, fascinating or outraging. Or you tell me.
Let's use outrageous.
Outrageous is a good one. These were two British biologists, Sir Patrick Geddes and Sir John Arthur Thompson, who not too long ago concluded that the reason why men were superior to women was that, and I quote, since male sperm were small and active, while female ova tended to be big and relatively inert, men were naturally more active, energetic, eager, passionate, and variable, while females were more passive, conservative, sluggish, and stable. Okay, this gives you a sense of what a narrative does. You construct a bit of a theory that justifies the fact that you are in a privileged position and I am not. And yes, these theories evolve with our societies, with our cultures. We have a theory right now that is very much in vogue. It's not necessarily just about men and women. It's about everybody who's privileged and those who are not. And that is the narrative of meritocracy that sounds so legitimate. It indicates that if I made it, it's because I deserved it. And it's a theory that really takes the context out of our accomplishments. It doesn't take it into account in explaining whether you succeeded because you are extraordinarily gifted or because you are born in an environment that allows you certain options, certain choices. I am a daughter of an environment that allowed me to pursue my interests, to go to school, to move away from home, to go to a better institution that fit my interests. And that is a privilege that not everybody has. And so, did I succeed because of my own merits only? Well, certainly you need to embrace the opportunities when they come along. So when I had my chances, I took them. And that is up to me. That is an individual behavior for the most part, because you also have to have a family and an environment that gives you confidence that you are in fact worthy enough of those opportunities. And I certainly had that. But let's not forget that if I had been born 20, 30 years ago in Syria or in Afghanistan, I would have had a completely different set of opportunities that were completely not dependent on me and my choices and my motivation and my talents. They were determined primarily by the context. And that's where the theory of meritocracy, in a sense, is extremely limited. But it's a narrative that we embrace. Places like the United States embrace it very, very enthusiastically because it justifies the power and the privilege of certain groups over others in a very compelling way, in many ways. So for men and women, we live in many societies where we have all kinds of theories about why men and women could be better or a better fit for certain roles versus others. And once you have those ideas in your head that women are good at certain professions, but they're not good at others, you end up selecting people accordingly. And the selection can be blatant, where you don't even allow them in a certain industry or organization, but it can be most of the time very subtle and even unconscious, where I have this idea in my head, constructed through all these stories of the idea that men are more agentic and they're stronger, and women are more modest, more nurturing, that maybe you don't see them in leadership positions because a leader is supposed to be strong and women are not as strong, or that they are supposed to be less aggressive, quote unquote. There's all kinds of imagery that we associate with different groups that deeply shapes the choices that we make in who gets a certain assignment, who gets a certain role, who gets an opportunity, who do you even think about to give them a new client, a new project, or a new big position. These are things that operate very subtly, and we don't always recognize them. And they are the artifact of all of these narratives that justify the status quo in many ways. And that's what oftentimes women have to struggle with. Now, intersectionality makes all of this even more powerful in its effects, because there are certain narratives about the relative role of men and women in society. There are plenty of narratives about the different roles of different races in societies. And those narratives are even more punishing of certain groups than others. If you are an African American and you have to contend with centuries of the constructions of different images of what a black person does and a white person does or an Asian person does, these are all ways in which we understand, interpret, and judge behaviors in people that can have a lot of repercussions. So if you are not just a woman, but you're a black woman, you have double narrative working, oftentimes not in your favor, depending on the circumstances. And it's an extra level of challenge that, however, we can kind of poke if we understand how these stories come about, and we are able to unpack them to see how ridiculous they are. This idea of the male sperm and the female ova created entirely different people as a result is, to our ears right now, insane. So it's possible to unpack those justifications so that they become less powerful, and therefore opening possibilities for everybody, not just for the people that have enjoyed privilege for a really, really, really long time.
What about networks? Obviously, I think of networks as the Ellevate community, and just there's a lot of power in that. I see it firsthand, and our community supporting each other and opening doors and giving advice and trying, and I think we're, particularly through an intersectional lens, because we are a community predominantly of women, we're very aware of our power, which, to your point, in many ways is not the same degree of power that a white, heterosexual man will have. But we all have some degree of power, and how we work to create that, community of interdependence, and how we support one another, and the power shifts and use our power to lift all of us up and to change the narrative. But you talk about networks too, and what does that mean for you, and why is that important to the research and the work that you do?
Yes, it's very important for two reasons. One is that because of the opportunities available, men and women do tend to create different kinds of networks. But the primary reason why it becomes important is precisely to the point you were making, Kristy, that there is power in the solidarity that women find in networks that support them as a group. And one of the things that we were very interested in understanding in our research was the extent to which women are indeed supportive of one another in the workplace, in a professional environment, versus the other stereotype that floats around, oftentimes in business circles in particular, the women are not necessarily particularly good to each other in professional environments. There is another narrative about the cat fight, so to speak, or the queen bee. So the idea of the woman that is not particularly helpful to junior women that are coming up the ranks because the queen bee had to suffer herself to get there. And now this idea that they have to really make the road so smooth for the younger women is not particularly appealing to them. You have stereotypes of women being competitive with each other in the workplace. So we were very interested in unpacking that that competing stereotype. One, on the one hand, that says women are supportive of each other, and the opposite that says women are competitive with one another. And on occasion, you will see them throwing each other under the bus. So we collected data on this particular issue, and the first place where we collected the data was a large bank that employs over 50,000 people. And we had an opportunity to collect data on how the employees of this bank evaluated managers and looked at, we were talking about thousands of managers that we looked at, and tens of thousands of evaluations of these managers. So we had really lots of data to play with. And we were interested in seeing how people evaluated a manager on multiple dimensions. Some had to do purely with competence and performance. Some had to do with how supportive and generous with their resources the manager was, all kinds, how energizing the person was, lots of different dimensions. And here is what we found. We were interested in knowing if women evaluated men and women managers differently. And the first stereotype says that women will probably evaluate men more positively because in a financial services industry, it's a more male typed profession. So you can associate performance and leadership with men more easily than with women. And so you might, in fact, give them positive evaluations compared to women. And the opposite stereotype says, no, actually, women are going to be supportive of one another. They're going to see the good in each other, and they're going to evaluate women more generously than men. We put it to the test, and the results were very clear. We found that women evaluated other women more positively across all criteria. And this is a result that, was in many ways surprising to a lot of people that we presented it to, including women. They were like, really? Is that the case? But this kind of reaction stimulated us to dig a little deeper. So we went back to all data that we collected about 12, 13 years prior in a large technology company that is even more male typed than a bank. And we thought that perhaps, years back, when women's advancement was not as good and not as clear, we would not find this kind of gender solidarity with women supporting other women in the way we have found in this bank. And we analyzed the data, and sure enough, once again, we found that women in this technology corporation evaluated female colleagues more positively than evaluated male colleagues. And in that environment, we saw the reverse going on as well, that men evaluated fellow men more positively than they evaluated women. So there is actually quite a compelling set of data on gender solidarity. So when you said that the networks among women and the community that Ellevate creates being a source of power for the women that belong in it, you are right. It does help. It does create a lot of support. We have other studies that indicate the same thing. There's a wonderful study of graduates of MBA programs that try to access leadership positions. And what the study found was that, of course, the network helps everybody, but for women, having both a big network and, in addition to it, a core group of women that are strongly associated with you, a set of close connections with a core group of women, amplifies the probability of you landing a leadership role 2.5 times. So it's not just the network as a whole, it's a strong network with fellow women. And in our book, Julie and I tell the story of Donatella Versace, who had her fair share of trouble establishing her power when she had, despite herself, to succeed her brother Gianni after he was murdered in Miami by this crazed fan. And the trouble that she encountered was primarily due to the fact that she was not seen by the company as having the critical resource that her brother Gianni had, which was a creative genius. He was seen as a one of a kind, and she, as the little sister, couldn't possibly be able to take over from him. Even though she had worked alongside him for many years, was in many ways his muse, and had run the creative side of the business behind the scenes when he was sick a few years prior. So she had plenty of accomplishments. But the moment she was supposed to lead the whole operation, people started to doubt her. And when people doubt you, it's very hard for you to feel that you have the power to influence the situation. And in her story, one big transformation occurred in her sense of power on a personal level, their ability to exercise it. And it was her recognition that she was constantly surrounded by men who did not believe in her capabilities. And slowly over the years, she started to encounter strong women who believed in her in a way that the men in her circle never did. And she began to add those women to the board of directors of the company as a source of confidence, a source of support. And they made a tremendous difference in her ability to embrace her power, to feel that she could lead, that she had somebody who had her back, and she didn't have to kind of guard herself constantly from doubt, both doubt from others and self imposed. So when we told her about this research finding I just described, she was one of the people who was not surprised to hear it, because as she put it, she said, I found enormous comfort in the support of women in her career. So yes, absolutely. It's very much the case that women have been shown to be able to help each other. I will add a caveat, however, because you did ask me about intersectionality, and that is a very important component of this discussion that we cannot leave unspoken. There is research on all of these affinity groups in organizations that basically shows that most affinity groups don't help much. And this research indicated that, there's only one type of affiliation group that actually helps with advancement, and it's women's groups. And one reason that I would venture is behind their unique contribution is that many affinity groups are true minority groups. There are just too few people in a company in positions of influence that can really help folks like them advance. You don't have enough folks in your group that are well positioned to support others that are coming up the ranks. But that is not necessarily the case with women. Now we have many more women in many industries, in many companies. And so the probability of some of those women, or sometimes many of those women, being in positions that are good enough to be able to influence the environment, to be able to open doors for others, becomes much more tangible. And that's why that research, in my view, indicates that the only type of affinity group that really is beneficial to their members is the group of women. But there is an exception. When their research looked specifically at Black women, they did not find that kind of positive repercussions for their advancement, for the probability of success, and so on and so forth. And here you could have all kinds of theories for why that's the case. I mean, if you recall feminism in the 70s, there was, and later, and even after that, there was quite a lot of controversy, oftentimes justified, about the fact that it was not a movement that did a really great job of being racially sensitive, integrated, truly inclusive. And it's entirely possible now that we are facing still some a really unintended consequence, or sometimes a consequence of just not doing the right thing and not doing a job that is truly sensitive to the fact that women of different backgrounds and different racial and ethnic composition have different needs and different goals and different challenges to overcome. So it is true that women can help each other tremendously. It's also true that we have to do a better job at helping all, including non-binary people that are sometimes caught in the middle of these dynamics and don't even know where they can find the support that they need. So it is complex the way you think about it, and both encouraging, because we do find that there is the possibility of supporting and lifting each other up, but also the caveat that we don't do as good a job with everyone. And also, honestly, going back to the meritocracy idea, wouldn't it be nice if we could evaluate the contribution of a colleague based just on the contribution itself, and not have all of these layers of evaluation and judgment that have nothing to do with the work? They have to do with our interpretation of the person, how much we identify with them because they are like us. So, it is a little bit disturbing to think that, especially in that technology company, that men evaluated men more positively and women evaluated women more positively. There is a fundamental bias in those evaluations that ideally we should try to resolve. And the only way you can resolve it is to create systems and processes that allow us to be more objective in how we evaluate people, as opposed to allowing this kind of subjective judgment to come in the way of truly appreciating what somebody's contributing or not.
So much just to think about here, and I encourage our listeners to really, go deep on this conversation and to think about the ways that we have access to power and others don't, and what we can do to help shift that paradigm. Thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast. This was a phenomenal conversation, and I cannot wait to dive into your book.
Thank you so much, Kristy. I appreciate the conversation, and hope that people will engage with the deeper thought process. You can find a lot of kind of deeper conversation, deeper discussion in our book, Power for All, where we delve into these topics and many more around them that hopefully will be helpful to you.
welcome back. That was powerful. Tons of insights. And again, as I was saying, I'm a nerd. So her book, Tiziana's book, Power for All: How It Works and Why It's Everyone's Business, is going on my list ASAP. Everyone should go and buy it. So, Allison, what you have going on the Rising Leaders Roundtable this week?
Oh, something that we are experts in, expanding your network with purpose. Be there Thursdays, 12 o'clock. Don't miss it.
And next week we have at the Executive Roundtable, Tuesday at 1 p.m., we're going to be talking about 3 keys to reinventing your relationship with money and preparing yourself for a later stage career pivot. This is a really powerful group of people who really care about each other. And I think this topic in particular is very interesting as we come into a recession, and what can we do to prepare for that and prepare our career for that. Our entrepreneurs group will be talking about packaging your expertise in group programs for a greater ROI. They meet every Thursday at 4 p.m. Eastern. So join them if you're interested. And now for our first, Allison, do you want to go first on this one? Again, we every week read and celebrate people's accomplishment and how we are breaking barriers. And again, sometimes it's a little sad because it took a long time, but it's also very heartening to see that and celebrate the women that are making changes.
Making changes, making history. And this one is to kick us off is a very, very long time. So Jennifer Jones became the first woman to take office as Rotary International President in the service organization's 117-year existence. Wow.
Oh, wow.
Go Jennifer.
117 years it took.
Yeah. Only. Just
a tad. Kimberly Dowdell was appointed the first Black woman president of the American Institute of Architects.
Emily Engel-Natsky became the NHL's first female full-time coach.
We had a hockey first last week, so go hockey. Avery Bishop became the first Asian woman to be crowned Miss Texas. We also had a Miss some state last week first.
Minnesota.
Very exciting.
Wow. And Arlette Lon will soon be the first female hiker to complete all 11 U.S. national scenic trails. Well, I want to go on these trails. I want to know what the 11.
Where are these?
This is awesome. Yeah.
Yesenia Sanchez is the first Latina and first woman elected sheriff of Alameda County, California.
All right.
Felicidades.
Congrats to all of them.
Yeah, this is it's exciting to see. And if you want us to shout out your successes, your first, let us know. You can email us at podcast@ellevatenetwork.com. Would love to hear what you're up to and give you a shout out. Next week, also still Kristy interviewing Maureen Chiana. Maureen is fantastic. She is really focused on neuroleadership and how your brain functions and how that impacts your leadership styles. She is fantastic. She's been at our Rising Leaders Roundtable quite a bit in the past and has also spoken at it. So I really, really am looking forward to this conversation with Maureen. She is a neuroleadership and resilient trainer and consultant, leverages brain science, insights, and emotional intelligence to help leaders and organizations become more human, similar to what we were talking about at the beginning of this episode, and help their people maximize brain power to transform how they lead, work, and live. So join us next week for Kristy's conversation with Maureen.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes. Give us 5 stars and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at EllevateNTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. ellevatecontent.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.